I never imagined that my life would spiral so drastically in a single evening, but here we are. It all started with a simple dinner invitation. My husband, Samuel, and I were visiting his old college friend, Kurt. The plan was clear: spend the day with Kurt and his wife, enjoy dinner, and then head home the next day. No complications, no surprises. But that evening, Samuel made a decision that would change everything. Kurt had asked about any dietary restrictions before he started cooking, and as usual, I reminded Samuel about my severe shellfish allergy. I've carried an EpiPen since I was a child after a near fatal reaction to shrimp at a birthday party. My parents drilled into me: always ask about cross-contamination, always be cautious. Samuel knew all this. He was there when I almost died from an accidental exposure, yet somehow when Kurt served dinner, it was a plate of shrimp pasta. I knew immediately what had happened. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor, and asked Kurt if there was shrimp in the sauce. Samuel, still sitting there like nothing was wrong, shot me a look. "Stop making a scene," he said. "You're being dramatic." But the truth is, I wasn't being dramatic. My throat was already tightening, and the tingling sensation on my tongue was unmistakable. As I rushed to the bathroom, trying to make myself vomit, Samuel followed me, telling me I was overreacting. But in that moment, it hit me. Samuel had orchestrated this. He deliberately set up a situation where I could be fed something that could kill me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. He had wanted to prove something, and in doing so, he risked my life. This wasn't the first time he'd dismissed my allergy, my safety. It wasn't the first time he had put me second to his own desires. And yet this was the final straw. Now, as I sit in this hotel room, thinking back on everything that led to this, I can't help but wonder, was I really overreacting? Or was this the moment I finally saw my husband for who he truly was? I'm not sure when I first realized that something was off, but looking back, the signs were always there. My name is Claire, and I'm 34 years old. I'm a pediatrician, working long hours at a hospital where I'm dedicated to making sure children are safe and healthy. I should have seen the irony that the man I married was the one person who couldn't respect my well-being. Samuel and I met 7 years ago when I was still in medical school. He was charming in that effortless way, the kind of guy who could talk about anything and make it sound interesting. We started dating not long after, and things moved quickly from there. He was everything I thought I wanted: smart, funny, and attentive. We both loved traveling, hiking, and trying new things, and soon enough, we were living together. A few years later, Samuel proposed in a quiet, intimate ceremony, surrounded by just a few close friends. It felt right, like we were building something meaningful. But even early on, there were small things I ignored. He was always the one to pick the restaurants for us, even when I'd politely suggest somewhere else. There were the occasional comments about how we could just go to a seafood place. It would be fun. Each time, I'd gently remind him about my allergy, but it felt like he didn't fully get it. It wasn't just a minor sensitivity. My allergy could land me in the ER if I wasn't careful. But Samuel's attitude towards food and my allergy was dismissive, like it was an inconvenience to him. The first big red flag came just a few months into our marriage. Samuel had invited me to a gathering at his family's house for his dad's retirement party. It was a seafood feast: lobster, shrimp, crab, the works. When I arrived, Samuel's mom had thoughtfully prepared a separate plate for me. But instead of expressing gratitude, I could feel Samuel's gaze on me as I carefully picked from my plate. He seemed annoyed. "Don't be so picky," he said later that night when we were alone, his voice casual but cutting. "It's just food, Claire. You're making a scene." The words stung, but I shrugged them off, brushing aside my discomfort. It was just a small comment. Maybe he was just stressed from his dad's retirement party, but it wasn't the last time. As the years went on, Samuel started making subtle digs about my allergy. "You're being dramatic" became his go-to phrase when we'd talk about food. If we went to a restaurant, he'd sigh when I asked the server if the dish was safe for me to eat. At times, he would even joke about how allergies were just an excuse for people to be difficult. I laughed it off, thinking it was just his way of dealing with things. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't fully understand how serious this was to me. But we had a good marriage, right? We traveled together. We enjoyed our nights and watching movies. Samuel was there when I had a miscarriage 2 years ago, and I thought that maybe we'd gotten through the toughest parts of life together. But when my mom passed away last year from diabetes complications, everything started to change. I wasn't prepared for how much grief would affect me. Samuel was there, yes, but he was distant. He didn't understand how hard it was to watch my mom deteriorate over those last 2 years. He didn't see how I was being drained by her endless hospital visits and her need for constant care. And the worst part, he didn't even try to understand. After she passed, Samuel seemed more concerned about his own discomfort around my grief than about supporting me. The tension between us started to grow. I began to question everything. How had we gotten here? Was I the one being unreasonable for wanting his support? Or had I just been blindly following a relationship that was no longer working? The first time I considered leaving was when Samuel started suggesting that maybe I was too rigid about my allergy. It wasn't just a matter of food anymore. He wasn't treating my health like something to be taken seriously. His dismissiveness about the things I held dear, like my safety and my grief, had escalated, but I had always told myself, it's just a phase, it'll get better. But then that night with Kurt, the shrimp pasta, everything became clear. The first time I started questioning Samuel's loyalty to me wasn't about the shrimp dinner. It wasn't even the first time he'd dismissed my allergy. It started with the little things, the things I had overlooked for years. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how often Samuel had undermined me, how often his dismissive attitude made me feel small. A few months ago, I noticed it again. Samuel began making more pointed comments about my allergy. If we went to a restaurant and I asked the server to double-check the ingredients or confirm that the food hadn't touched any shellfish, Samuel would roll his eyes or sigh loudly. "You really think they don't know what they're doing?" he'd say, and the embarrassment I felt in front of waiters and staff made my skin crawl. I tried to brush it off, but inside something was shifting. I realized I wasn't just dealing with a husband who didn't respect my health. I was married to a man who saw my needs as a burden, as an inconvenience. The first time it truly hit me was when we were at a friend's dinner party. We were invited to meet some of Samuel's old college friends, and I was already nervous about the food situation. I knew the hosts liked to cook elaborate meals, and I worried I'd be placed in the position of having to explain my allergy. But when we walked into their house, I was greeted with the unmistakable scent of seafood. My heart sank. I was already trying to figure out how I could navigate the situation when Samuel casually mentioned to the hostess, "Claire's allergic to shellfish, so just make sure there's something else for her." I glanced at him, surprised that he hadn't offered to help in any other way, like maybe offering a solution or suggesting something else. Instead, he leaned back on the couch and started chatting with his friends. When dinner was served, I found that the meal was mostly seafood, but there was a small portion of grilled chicken for me. I hesitated, unsure whether I should eat it. I didn't want to cause a fuss, but I couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling in the pit of my stomach. Samuel had done nothing to help prevent this, even though he knew how serious my allergy was. He simply shrugged when I asked, "Did you make sure the chicken wasn't near any shrimp?" His response was vague, and his eyes avoided mine. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the way he dismissed my concerns. It was about the way he made me feel like I was the one being unreasonable, as if my allergy, my health, was just some quirky thing I was being dramatic about. In that moment, I realized he wasn't supporting me. He wasn't even trying. He was just going along with his own convenience, and I was left on the sidelines of my own life. But the problem wasn't just that Samuel didn't respect my allergy. It was that over time, I had started to realize he didn't respect me. I'd begun to see his attitude in other ways. When we had disagreements, he'd often accuse me of overreacting, of being too emotional. I remember one night when we argued over something small, whether we should go out for dinner or eat at home, and his response was typical. "You're always so difficult. Why can't you just be easygoing for once?" That cut deep. But the worst part was when I thought back to all the times I'd done the same thing, made myself smaller to fit his expectations, to keep the peace. I would avoid speaking up when something bothered me, pushing my discomfort aside just to keep the atmosphere light. I had always tried to make our relationship work, but somewhere along the way, I had lost myself. The cracks in our marriage weren't just about my allergy or his disregard for it, they were about everything that had been swept under the rug. The moments when I was expected to put aside my feelings for his convenience. The years I spent silently wondering if I was enough. The hollow apologies after fights that never seemed to change anything. Then came the weekend trip to Kurt's house. when Samuel made it clear that everything I feared was real. I had asked him repeatedly to make sure Kurt didn't cook with shellfish. I trusted him to take the necessary precautions because I knew how much this allergy meant to me. But Samuel had promised me, reassured me, and then allowed this to happen anyway. It was no longer about food, it was about control, about him believing that his actions could justify putting my life at risk just to prove a point. The worst part? When I went to the bathroom to throw up, trying to get the shrimp out of my system before it could do any more damage, Samuel just sat there, indifferent. He didn't check on me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't even apologize. When I returned to the table, he blamed me for overreacting. He called me dramatic, like my life didn't matter. That night, I realized that Samuel wasn't the man I thought he was. And if I didn't make a change, I'd be living in this toxic relationship for the rest of my life. The moment I discovered what Samuel had done, everything about our marriage fractured in an instant. It wasn't just about the shrimp dinner, it was about the truth I had been avoiding for so long. I'll never forget how it felt sitting at Kurt's house, surrounded by friends, pretending like everything was normal, while my life was slowly falling apart. When Samuel told Kurt we could eat anything, that it wasn't a big deal, I felt a pit in my stomach. My husband was supposed to be my protector, my ally. Instead, I felt betrayed. But I kept quiet because I didn't want to make a scene. I trusted him. I trusted him to have my back, just like he always had in the past. But this time, he didn't. When Kurt brought out the shrimp pasta, I immediately knew something was wrong. The sauce was too thick, too rich, and the small pink pieces scattered throughout it looked all too familiar. Shrimp. Samuel had lied to me. He had intentionally let me sit at that table, knowing full well that the food wasn't safe for me. I hadn't eaten a bite yet, but the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My heart was racing, and the blood drained from my face. I didn't even know if I could keep calm long enough to get out of there. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor, and I asked Kurt, my voice shaking, "Is there shrimp in this sauce?" Kurt, looking confused, nodded. "Yes, it's shrimp marinara. Samuel said you love shrimp, so I thought you'd be happy with it." I couldn't believe it. Samuel, sitting at the table with a casual look on his face, didn't say a word. He didn't try to stop Kurt or explain himself. He didn't even seem to care. It was like I wasn't even there. "Why would you let him make shrimp when you know about my allergy?" I asked, my voice louder now, but still controlled. The words were fighting their way out of my chest. How could he be so reckless, so cold? Samuel finally put down his fork and looked at me, his face blank. He didn't apologize. He didn't even seem sorry. He just said, "I thought a little shrimp wouldn't hurt you. You're being dramatic, Claire. Kurt spent all afternoon cooking this, and you're acting like it's some kind of catastrophe." My stomach churned. The tightness in my throat was unmistakable. I could feel my body beginning to react, the itching and swelling creeping down my throat. I turned away from him, trying to gather myself, but everything was spinning. I rushed inside to the bathroom, desperately trying to make myself throw up. It was the only thing I could do to stop the allergic reaction from getting worse. As I forced myself to vomit, I could hear Samuel's voice in the background, telling Kurt that I was just being dramatic. I didn't even care anymore. I just needed to get the shrimp out of my system. The fear in my chest was rising. I didn't know if the EpiPen would be enough if the reaction was severe. But it wasn't just the allergic reaction that was killing me. It was what Samuel had done. He didn't care about my safety. He didn't care about my life. He didn't even respect the one thing that had been constant in my life since childhood, my allergy. He had let this happen on purpose, to prove some point I couldn't even understand. I rinsed my mouth out repeatedly, trying to clear the taste from my mouth. When I returned to the table, Kurt's wife was already clearing away my plate, her face filled with concern. She had no idea how badly things had gone. She only knew that I hadn't eaten. I looked at Samuel and said, as calmly as I could manage, "I need to leave, now." But Samuel just stared at me, his expression annoyed. "You're overreacting. You didn't even eat that much." "I don't care," I snapped, feeling the tears welling up in my eyes. "You lied to me. You let me sit here and risk my life for some stupid point you wanted to prove." It was like a switch flipped. Samuel didn't even try to apologize. Instead, he acted as if I was the one in the wrong, the one causing the problem. He said, "You always make everything about you. You're ruining this weekend, Claire." I grabbed my purse and reached for my things, but Samuel stood up, blocking my path. "Where do you think you're going? We came here together, so you're going home with me." I froze. The nerve, the arrogance. I couldn't believe what he was saying. No, I'm not going anywhere with you. Samuel's face tightened. You'll regret this. Don't be so dramatic. We're married, Claire. You can't just walk away because of a little dinner. It's not even a big deal. I grabbed my bag and rushed out the door, not looking back. I didn't care if he followed me or not. But when I reached the car, I saw him standing in the driveway, watching me. I felt a brief moment of hesitation, but it quickly disappeared. I was done. I couldn't do this anymore. Samuel tried calling me on the drive home, but I didn't answer. He texted me, telling me I was making a huge mistake. He said he was sorry and didn't understand why I was blowing everything out of proportion. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something deep inside me had broken. This wasn't about food anymore. It wasn't even about the allergy. This was about trust, about respect, and about the man I thought I had married. Samuel had crossed a line, and he hadn't even realized it. And as I sat there in that lonely hotel room, I realized that I was never going back to him. I've never experienced a feeling like the one that washed over me when I left Samuel behind. It was a strange combination of relief and disbelief. Relief that I had finally stood up for myself, but disbelief at what had just happened. How had I gotten here? How had I ended up in a marriage where my safety didn't seem to matter? The first few hours after I left were a blur. I drove to the nearest hotel and checked in without telling Samuel where I was going. I didn't want to talk to him, but he called anyway. His first text came almost immediately after I had gotten into my room. "Where are you? We need to talk about this." The second text, about an hour later, "I didn't think you'd overreact like this." I didn't respond. I couldn't. How could I even begin to explain to him why this was so much more than a dinner gone wrong? It wasn't about the shrimp. It was about the way he had disregarded my needs, my health, my entire life. I couldn't understand how he couldn't see it. The man I had trusted with my safety, with my future, had deliberately let me put myself at risk. And for what? To prove that my allergy wasn't real? To prove that I was just being difficult? The reality of what had happened sank in as I sat on the edge of the bed in that small hotel room. I could still feel the tightness in my throat, the lingering panic of almost having a full-blown allergic reaction. The memory of it made my hands shake as I picked up my phone. His calls had started again. I ignored them. Instead, I focused on breathing. Just breathe, Claire. Focus on the next moment. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop the flood of emotions. Anger, frustration, confusion. How had I let things go on like this for so long? How had I tolerated being treated this way for years? Samuel's behavior, his dismissiveness, his lack of empathy, it wasn't just about one incident. It was about everything that had led up to this. All the times he had downplayed my feelings, ignored my concerns, and prioritized his own convenience over my safety. As the hours passed, the weight of it all started to feel unbearable. It wasn't just the betrayal of what had happened with the food. It was the realization that Samuel wasn't the man I thought he was. I kept thinking back to the way he had acted when I confronted him, the lack of remorse, the way he turned the situation back on me, as though I was the one who had ruined everything. He had no concept of the damage he'd caused, no understanding of the real, tangible consequences of his actions. All he cared about was his own convenience. I thought about all the things I had ignored over the years. The small ways he'd dismissed me, the times he'd made me feel like I wasn't enough, the times he made me feel guilty for having an allergy in the first place. I had always tried to be accommodating, always tried to make our lives easier. But somewhere along the way, I had lost myself in the process. I had stopped standing up for myself. I had let him chip away at my sense of worth piece by piece until I felt small, until I felt invisible. When the tears came, they were quiet at first, a slow trickle down my cheeks. Then they came faster, harder. I let them fall, not sure whether I was grieving for the woman I had been or the woman I had become. A woman who had put up with more than she should have. A woman who had let her needs take a back seat to the needs of a man who never truly cared. I realized then that I was done being that woman. The phone rang again. This time it was a voicemail from Samuel. I pressed play, knowing what was coming. "I don't get it, Claire." His voice was tight, almost pleading. "I'm sorry, I am. I don't understand why you're making this such a big deal. You're overreacting. You always do this. I thought we were past this. I thought we could just move on from this, but you're making it impossible. You're making me feel like I'm the one in the wrong. Please just talk to me." The message hit me like a punch in the stomach. How could he still be so blinded by his own perspective? How could he not see what he had done? He had put me in a situation where I could have died, and he was still blaming me for overreacting, still trying to manipulate me into believing that I was the problem. I couldn't listen to him anymore. I hung up and threw my phone across the bed. The tears kept coming, but now there was something else in my chest, something heavier than the anger and hurt. It was a decision, a firm resolve that I wasn't going back. Not now, not ever. I realized that what I was feeling wasn't just pain. It was the beginning of something else, the beginning of me reclaiming my life. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bound by Samuel's control, by his manipulation, by his twisted sense of what was reasonable. I had to face the truth. I had stayed in this marriage for far too long, telling myself that things would get better, that he would change. But Samuel wasn't going to change. I was the one who had to change. I had to stop being afraid to stand up for myself. I had to stop letting him dictate what was acceptable and what wasn't. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going back to Samuel. I wasn't going back to a marriage where my life didn't matter. And as I packed my things to move out, I couldn't help but feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For the first time in years, I was finally taking control of my own life again. The first few days after I left Samuel felt like a whirlwind, a constant cycle of conflicting emotions. Relief that I was finally free from the toxic hold he had on me, yet also deep uncertainty about what came next. I stayed in the hotel, letting everything settle, but I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that something much bigger than just the dinner had cracked open between us. I kept thinking about the conversations we had avoided, the things I never said to him out of fear of rocking the boat. Now I was the one who had to face the reality of walking away from a marriage that had taken so much out of me. Samuel didn't waste any time. His calls became frequent, his messages even more so. At first, I didn't respond, not knowing what to say. It was too soon, too raw. But as days went by, the messages escalated, becoming more urgent, more demanding. And then they shifted tone. They started to alternate between guilt-tripping and manipulation. The first message was simple, straightforward. "Where are you? We need to talk about this. I can't fix anything if you won't talk to me." But that soon turned into a barrage of angry, accusatory messages. "I can't believe you're doing this to me. You're overreacting. You always make everything a bigger deal than it is." I stared at the words, feeling a tightness in my chest. I knew his words were designed to get under my skin. He was trying to force me into submission, to make me feel guilty for the decision I had made. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even close to being sorry. He just wanted me to come back so everything could go back to normal, the kind of normal where he controlled the narrative, and I played the role of the understanding wife. It didn't take long before I had to block his number. His messages started flooding in from different numbers, text after text, voicemail after voicemail. When that didn't work, he started showing up at my apartment unannounced. I'd be coming home from work, and there he was, sitting in his car across the street, watching me. It wasn't just intrusive, it was borderline terrifying. One afternoon, I got home from work, exhausted and drained, and I saw his car in the parking lot. My heart sank into my stomach. I knew he had been trying to reach me all day. I knew what this meant. As I walked to my front door, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned to see Samuel, looking disheveled, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Claire, please," he called out, his voice hoarse. "I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk about this. I don't know what happened, but I know I messed up. Just give me a chance to explain." I froze at the door. I couldn't believe he was here. After everything, he still didn't understand. He still thought this was about a misunderstanding, about some minor disagreement. He was trying to downplay it, as if his betrayal of my health, my trust, was something we could just talk through. I swallowed the lump in my throat, fighting to keep my composure. "No, Samuel, we're not doing this. I don't want to talk to you." He took a step toward me, his hand outstretched. "Please, don't do this. You can't just leave without giving me a chance to fix things. I'm sorry. I messed up. You know I didn't mean it. I wanted to show you that you're not as fragile as you think. You always overreact to everything." I felt the anger building in me, hot and fierce. "I don't need to prove anything to you. You deliberately risked my life to prove a point. You didn't care about me, Samuel. You didn't care if I lived or died. I don't know what kind of man you are anymore, but I know that I'm not going to keep making excuses for you." His face hardened, and he took a step back, as if my words had physically pushed him away. "So this is it, huh? You're just going to throw away everything we built? After everything I did for you? You're going to leave me over some stupid dinner?" I felt a tremor in my hands, but I held my ground. "Yes, I'm leaving, and I'm not coming back. You're not the man I married anymore, Samuel. I don't even know who you are." I opened the door, stepping inside, but before I could shut it, Samuel's voice stopped me. "Don't you dare leave. You can't just walk away from this marriage without consequences," he spat, his anger rising. "I'll fight you for everything. You'll regret this." The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. My breath was shallow, my heart pounding in my chest. His threats felt real, but in that moment, I realized something important. He didn't scare me anymore. Samuel had lost the ability to control me, to manipulate me into believing I was the problem. And no matter what he said or did, I wasn't going to let him take away my peace. But even with that resolve, the fear lingered. What would he do next? Would he escalate this further? His threats were only the beginning. The next morning, I opened my phone to a flurry of new messages, but one stood out. I spoke to my mom. She agrees with me. "You're being completely unreasonable. She thinks you're overreacting. She told me to make you see that." I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. His mom, the same woman who had watched me cry at every family gathering when he dismissed me? She had never liked me, and now she was backing him up? It was the final insult. Samuel wasn't just manipulating me. He was manipulating his family, too, trying to turn everyone against me as if I were the villain in this story. I sat there for a moment, seething, before the reality sank in. Samuel had done this. He had dragged his family into this, turned them into pawns in his game. And I wasn't going to be a part of it. I wasn't going to be made to feel like I was the one who was wrong. In the days that followed, everything seemed to unravel in slow motion. My phone kept buzzing with messages from Samuel, from his family, but I ignored every single one. Each message only made my heart heavier, my stomach twist with dread. I had to disconnect, to shut it all out. But the truth was, as much as I tried to block them out, Samuel's words still echoed in my mind. He didn't understand. None of them did. Samuel's mother had reached out to me, just like him, saying I was being too dramatic. His brothers, in their own way, followed suit, all pointing fingers at me for overreacting. It didn't matter that I had been clear so many times about my allergy, my health. It didn't matter that I was literally at risk of dying if exposed to shellfish. None of that mattered. They were all trying to make me feel like I was the unreasonable one. The messages continued, and each one chipped away at the resolve I had built up until I could no longer ignore the dark, heavy weight that pressed down on my chest. Every new text, every voicemail, felt like a blade twisting deeper into my side. Samuel had a way of using words that made me question myself, made me feel guilty for wanting something so simple as basic respect and care. He kept trying to rewrite the story, his version of what happened, where I was the one who had blown everything out of proportion, where my allergy was a minor inconvenience and not a life-threatening condition. And just when I thought I could breathe again, just when I thought I was strong enough to move on, something happened that pushed me to my breaking point. It was late one night, and I was sitting in my hotel room trying to sort through my thoughts when I got a call. It was from my work. My heart sank in my chest. Why would they be calling me this late? "Hello?" I answered, my voice a little shaky. "Claire, hi, it's Anna from the front desk. We've had an incident here. Someone came in, and they're asking for you." My blood ran cold. "Who? Who is it?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's Samuel," Anna said. "He's in the lobby, saying he needs to speak with you." I was frozen. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. He had somehow found me. I didn't know how, but somehow he had tracked me down. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my hands shaking. "Don't let him in," I said, my voice rising with panic. "Please don't let him in." I already told him he couldn't come up. He's been insistent. "He's leaving now, but I just thought you should know." I barely registered her words. I was in shock. How had he found me? How had he gotten past the walls I had built around myself? I could feel the air in the room growing thick, suffocating. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, holding my head in my hands. A few minutes later, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling up in front of the hotel. My stomach lurched. I didn't need to look out the window to know it was him. It was always him. His presence, his voice, his manipulation. Even from a distance, I could feel it closing in on me. I sat there, paralyzed by the fear that had begun to creep into my chest. Fear of him. Fear of what he could do. Samuel had a way of making everything feel like it was my fault. He twisted everything around, and no matter how much I tried to protect myself, he always found a way to slip past my defenses. Every text, every call, every word he spoke was like an echo in my mind. You're being unreasonable. You're overreacting. You're making a mistake. The thoughts swirled in my head, a storm of confusion and self-doubt. Was I being unreasonable? Was I making a mistake by walking away? The guilt gnawed at me until I couldn't breathe properly. But deep down, something inside me knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't my fault. I didn't know how long I sat there before I finally picked up my phone and dialed Becca, my lawyer. She picked up on the first ring. "Claire, are you okay?" Her voice was calm, but I could hear the concern there. "I don't know what to do anymore," I whispered. "He's found me. He's trying to break down everything I've built." Becca was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're not alone. You have the power to control this. Do you need me to intervene?" I thought for a second. Yes, I needed help. I needed someone who wouldn't let Samuel manipulate me, someone who would stand firm. "Yes," I said, my voice stronger now. "Please, help me." I stayed on the phone with Becca as she made calls, arranging for legal support and ensuring the hotel had a record of Samuel's visit. I felt the darkness of the moment start to lift, just a little. As I talked to her, a sense of clarity began to creep in. The dark moment, the moment where I felt like I was drowning, was starting to recede. Samuel could no longer hold me in the tight grip of his manipulation. I wasn't going to let him break me. When the call ended, I stood up, taking a long, steadying breath. For the first time since I had left him, I felt the slightest spark of hope, the kind of hope that comes with realizing that even in the darkest of moments, you can find the strength to fight back. I was no longer the woman who would apologize for my needs. I was no longer the woman who let fear dictate my actions. I was Claire, and I was fighting for myself. And I was done being afraid. The turning point came in the most unexpected way. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation or a grand gesture. It was a quiet realization that I had more power over my life than I ever gave myself credit for. It happened a few days after the incident with Samuel showing up at the hotel. As much as I tried to keep myself busy, to focus on the little things that would help me move forward, my mind kept returning to that moment, the suffocating realization that Samuel's presence still haunted me, still held the power to make me doubt myself. I kept thinking about the man I had married and wondering what had happened to him. How had we gone from being a team, sharing dreams and plans, to this cold, detached relationship where my life was a game to him? The truth was, I couldn't go back to that life. No matter how much Samuel begged or how many manipulative messages he sent, I had to remind myself that I was stronger than I thought. He had done everything in his power to chip away at my self-worth. He had gaslit me into thinking I was the problem, convinced me that I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much, but deep down, I knew the truth. I knew that I was not overreacting. I wasn't the one who had betrayed the trust in our marriage. And that's when it hit me. For so long, I had waited for Samuel to apologize, to acknowledge the hurt he caused. But that was never going to happen. Samuel wasn't going to change. I was the one who had to change. I had to stop waiting for him to validate my feelings and start validating myself. I had to give myself permission to walk away and never look back, no matter how difficult or painful it was. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't going to let Samuel dictate the terms of my healing anymore. I wasn't going to let him play the victim, make me feel guilty for protecting myself. I had the right to set boundaries, to protect my well-being, and I wasn't going to let him guilt-trip me into thinking I didn't. I called Becca, my lawyer, and told her it was time to take the next step. We'd been talking about the divorce for weeks now, but I had been hesitant to move forward. Part of me had been afraid of what it would mean for my future, of what life would look like without Samuel in it. But now, I was ready. I was ready to take control of my life, to move forward with strength and confidence. Becca reassured me that it was the right decision, and we began the legal process of moving forward with the divorce. She outlined the steps, explained the timeline, and made sure I understood my rights. I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders with each conversation, with each step we took toward ending the marriage. I realized that as much as the divorce would be painful, it was the only way to reclaim my life. It was the only way to stop the cycle of manipulation and start healing. That afternoon, I sent Samuel a final message. I had ignored his calls and texts for days, but this one felt different. This was the last communication I would have with him. It was time to close the door. Samuel, I'm done. I'm not coming back. I've made my decision. This marriage is over. I'm moving forward with my life, and you need to do the same. I didn't expect a response, but a few minutes later my phone buzzed. It was him. Claire, please don't do this. You're making a huge mistake. I can't lose you. Please. His words were desperate, but they didn't faze me anymore. I had made my peace with the decision. There was no turning back, no more manipulation, no more gaslighting. It was time to take my life back. I blocked his number, silencing any further attempts at contact. I knew it would be hard, but it was the first step toward freedom. I felt the last ties to him snap, and in their place, I felt something stronger, self-respect. I had drawn a line, and I wasn't going to let anyone cross it again. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, consultations with my lawyer, and packing up my life. I found an apartment in a quiet part of town, away from the places where Samuel might show up uninvited, away from the memories. The apartment wasn't much, but it was mine. I filled it with the things that mattered most: my books, the photos of my parents, my favorite plants, and it started to feel like a sanctuary. I also started reconnecting with my friends, people I hadn't spoken to in months. It was strange at first, reaching out to them, asking to meet up, but their warmth, their support, made all the difference. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the woman who was clinging to a broken relationship anymore. I was Claire again, strong, independent, and, most importantly, free. But the most important realization came when I looked in the mirror one morning. For the first time in years, I saw myself without the shadow of Samuel looming over me. I didn't see the woman who had been manipulated and gaslighted. I didn't see the woman who had tolerated abuse in silence. I saw the woman who had fought for her life. And that was the woman who was going to rebuild. The fallout came quickly, and yet it wasn't as dramatic as I had imagined. I thought there would be a confrontation, a grand unraveling of all the secrets Samuel had kept hidden. But the truth was, Samuel didn't need to keep anything hidden anymore. The mask had slipped off long ago, and now I saw him for who he truly was. A man who valued control over kindness, who prioritized his comfort over my well-being. A man who thought he could gaslight me into silence, into submission, for the rest of our lives. Once the divorce process officially began, the tension between us reached new heights. Samuel didn't try to reach out to me as much, but his family did. His mother, in particular, took it upon herself to remind me of all the ways I was making a mistake. I received messages from her telling me how disappointed she was, how I was ruining everything, how I should forgive Samuel. It wasn't surprising, considering she had always been the kind of woman who believed that a man's mistakes were easily excused, especially when it came to the women in his life. I didn't engage with her at all. There was nothing she could say to change my mind. Then there were the texts from his brothers. They claimed I was tearing apart the family, that I was being selfish and petty. I couldn't help but feel a sense of irony. Here I was, standing up for myself for the first time in years, and suddenly I was the villain in their story. They didn't understand what it was like to be in a relationship with someone who didn't listen, who didn't care. They didn't understand how it felt to be manipulated into silence, to be convinced that I wasn't good enough, that my feelings didn't matter. But none of their words had the power to move me anymore. The truth was clearer than ever. I wasn't responsible for their discomfort, their disappointments, or their expectations. This wasn't my battle to fight. I had done everything I could to be a good partner, to be understanding, to be there for Samuel, but I wasn't going to let anyone guilt-trip me into staying in a relationship where my safety, my health, and my self-worth were disregarded. I wasn't going to keep living a life where my needs were an afterthought. As Samuel's behavior began to unravel further, it became clear to me just how much damage he had done, not only to me, but to himself. Samuel's pride and ego had been shattered when I walked away, and instead of trying to fix the damage, he dug himself deeper into his own hole. He attempted to salvage his reputation by reaching out to our mutual friends, painting himself as the victim in all of this. He played the poor, misunderstood husband card, telling anyone who would listen that I was being cruel, that I had betrayed him, that I had left him without warning. But no one was buying it. My friends, the people who truly knew me, were unwavering in their support. They understood the situation and didn't let Samuel's lies cloud their judgment. But what hurt the most, what really left a deep scar, were the moments when he tried to manipulate my emotions again. He would text me late at night, telling me that he missed me, that things could still be fixed, that we could work through this. He couldn't understand that it wasn't just about him or what had happened in our marriage. It was about me. It was about my journey, my healing. His apologies no longer mattered. They were hollow, empty words designed to keep me in the same cycle, to make me feel guilty for choosing myself. And the final straw came when I received a message from Samuel's mother. It was long and filled with venom, as expected. She tried to make me feel like I was tearing apart a family that had already been fractured by years of enmeshment and control. She accused me of being selfish, of abandoning Samuel when he needed me most. And that was when I realized that I didn't owe any of them an explanation anymore. No amount of guilt, no amount of manipulation was going to change the fact that I had done the right thing. I had finally stood up for myself, for my health, for my future. I didn't respond to any more of Samuel's family. I blocked them all from my phone and social media accounts, not out of malice, but out of necessity. I needed space to heal, to rebuild, and I couldn't do that if they were still trying to pull me back into their toxic world. As for Samuel, things only got worse for him. I saw glimpses of what his life looked like without me. He was still reaching out to friends, trying to play the part of the wounded spouse, but it was clear that no one was buying the act anymore. People began to distance themselves from him, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice in that. His behavior, his selfishness, had finally caught up to him. In the weeks that followed, the legal proceedings became more intense. Samuel fought tooth and nail to keep control over the situation, but I remained steady. With the help of my lawyer, Becca, we made sure that everything was handled properly, legally, and in a way that would protect my future. The divorce was finalized soon after, but not without its toll. I had to accept that the man I thought I knew, who I had loved, was gone, replaced by someone I could no longer recognize. The man I had married had become a stranger to me. But as the final paperwork came through, I felt a strange sense of peace. The chapter with Samuel had ended. I didn't need his validation anymore. I had learned, through the pain, the manipulation, and the heartbreak, that I was stronger than I ever knew. The truth was, I was better off without him. Better off without the constant doubts, the constant worry, and the constant gaslighting. I had reclaimed my life, and I wasn't going to let him, or anyone, take that away from me. I looked around my new apartment one evening, after a long day of unpacking, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of calm. My future was mine again, and I wasn't going to waste another second on someone who had never truly valued me. I had walked away from the person I thought I loved, but I had gained something much more important in return: myself. When the divorce was officially finalized, I expected to feel a rush of triumph or maybe an overwhelming sadness. Instead, what washed over me was something quieter, something gentler. Relief. A kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. I sat at my small kitchen table in my new apartment, warm light spilling across the wooden surface as I turned the last page of the court documents. My name stood alone now, no longer tied to Samuel's. My signature looked almost unfamiliar to me, like the handwriting of a version of myself I had abandoned long ago. But the deeper truth was this: I was finally free. I set the papers aside and leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing myself for the next criticism, the next dismissal, the next dig about my allergy or my overreactions. The silence in my apartment wasn't lonely. It was mine. It felt intentional, sacred. Funny how silence can feel like healing when you've spent years suffocating under someone else's noise. The weeks that followed were filled with rebuilding, layer by layer. I went back to work with a steadier heart. My colleagues, who had sensed something off for months, welcomed me back warmly without prying questions. The children I treated seemed even brighter, their laughter somehow sharper in the air, maybe because I wasn't hearing them through the fog of Samuel's negativity anymore. I started going on morning walks at a nearby botanical garden. Something about watching things grow, wild, free, unashamed, settled something in me. It reminded me that healing wasn't linear. Some flowers bloom only after fire. Some seeds sprout only after being crushed. I also began reconnecting with myself in small ways. I started painting again, something Samuel always said was a waste of time. I reconnected with my college roommate Lila, who insisted on coming over every weekend with Thai food and the loudest laugh you've ever heard. I bought a small blue couch that made my whole apartment feel like a home. Most importantly, I started therapy. And one day, during a session, my therapist said something that struck me so deeply I felt it in my bones. "Claire," she said gently, "you didn't just survive something traumatic. You walked away before it killed you. That is not weakness, that is strength." I didn't realize I was crying until she handed me a tissue, because that was the thing I had refused to acknowledge, even to myself. Samuel could have killed me that night. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. And for months, maybe years, I had let his voice be louder than my intuition, louder than my fear, louder than my truth. But not anymore. There came a moment, quiet, unannounced, when I realized I wasn't scared of Samuel anymore. He no longer had power over me. I no longer flinched when my phone buzzed. I no longer had nightmares about being trapped at that dinner table with a plate of shrimp sitting in front of me like a loaded gun. Instead, I started dreaming about the future. My future. A future where my safety wasn't negotiable, where my voice wasn't something to apologize for, where my needs were not overreactions, but valid and worthy of respect. Months later, I received a message from a mutual friend who told me Samuel had moved back in with his mother. Apparently, after the divorce, he spiraled, lost friends, lost stability, lost the facade he'd carefully crafted for years. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel anything but distance. His life was no longer tied to mine. His consequences were no longer my burden. And that, I realized, was the true gift of freedom. One evening, after work, I found myself sitting on the pier by the lake near my new apartment. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of gold and rose. The water lapped softly against the wooden posts. I inhaled deeply, feeling the breeze fill my lungs. I was alive, more alive than I had been in years. As the sunset reflected across the lake, I whispered something to myself. 3 small words, but the most powerful I had ever spoken. I choose me. Not fear, not guilt, not obligation, not the woman I was when I allowed myself to shrink to survive. But me. My safety, my peace, my dignity, my life. Samuel had taken years from me, years of confidence, years of safety, years of quiet fear masquerading as love. But he would not take 1 second more. I stood up from the pier, brushed the hair from my face, and smiled, fully, genuinely, for the first time in a long time. I wasn't defined by what Samuel had done. I wasn't defined by the fear he bred into me. I wasn't defined by the marriage that broke me. I was defined by the woman who walked away, by the woman who healed, by the woman who chose herself. And that, more than anything, was the story I wanted the world to know.